Ni hao, it's such an honor to be here in Taiwan. I'm so happy that you invited me out and that I get to share with you some of the work that we've been doing at Yale trying to study the science of happiness. What I'm going to do today is to give you a quick introduction to why I decided to teach a course on happiness at Yale. And then I'm going to spend most of the time giving you what I bet is the best part, which is that I'm going to give you a very short version of the Yale class, completely for free. You don't have to pay the Yale tuition to go, you get it just for free. It will be very short, but you'll get a lot of the same insights that students get taking this class. And I hope you'll all leave with some hints about what you can do to put the science of happiness into practice for yourself. And so just to get started with a quick introduction, as you heard before, I am a professor at this lovely school at Yale University. I've been teaching there for the last 15 years. But very recently, just in the last 2 years, I took on a new role at Yale, where I became one of their heads of college. Instead of teaching at the front of the classroom, I became a head of college where I lived on campus with students. My house is in this courtyard with students here. I live with them right near their dorms. And that means I spend a little bit more time with them. Because I'm so close to them, I wound up seeing just how students live their life. I hang out with them in coffee shops. I see them up close and personal. And that was when I started to worry more about my students. Because I was seeing this so-called mental health crisis really up close and personal, where students weren't as happy at Yale as I thought. At first I worried that this was something that was wrong with Yale University, a very elite school. But as I started to learn more, I learned that this wasn't just a problem at Yale. This is something that was happening with young people nationally and even internationally. So just to give you a sense, because I think some of us think about life in college, especially college in the United States, and we have a certain picture of what it looks like. If you look on Google, this is what Google thinks of college students as. They're all very happy, they're smiling, even some where they're doing lots of work, they're still smiling and happy. That's what we often think. But the statistics look a little bit different. In fact, here's just one set of statistics, some pretty awful mental health statistics, that come from a recent assessment of national college health. This is in the US right now, but this is what's happening nationally throughout the nation. And here's what the statistics show. So over 40% of college students in the US right now report being so depressed it's difficult to function. Over 50% say that they regularly feel hopeless, so they don't have hope about the future. Over 60% say that they experience overwhelming anxiety, which is the highest level of anxiety that students could report. Over 60% also say that they feel very lonely a lot of the time. And 80% say that they always feel overwhelmed by the kinds of things they have to do, so they constantly feel stressed. And this ends up becoming part of a worse mental health crisis if you look at this statistic, where over 10% of college students say that they've seriously considered suicide in the last 10 years. So more than 1 in 10. If I was in a classroom like this, it'd be probably more than 100 people in this audience would be seriously considering suicide. And so these statistics are really bad. They're very, very scary. And I wanted to do something about them. And because I was a psychologist, I knew that there was something that could be done. Because I knew that there had to be hope out there. And that hope came from science. It came from the fact that in the field of psychology, we have a lot of work studying the kinds of things that you can do to feel a little bit happier. And that work comes from a field known as positive psychology, really trying to take a scientific approach to studying happiness. Well, how do you do that? How do you take a scientific approach to happiness? Well, it works very simply. Researchers go out, they try to find some happy people. Turns out they're out there. Here in Taiwan, back in the US, you can find the happy people that are out there. And then you ask, what's the secret? What are these happy people doing that the rest of us are not doing? You can study that, you can get some hints about the behavior that really helps. And then you can do experiments to make people who aren't happy do those behaviors. And you can ask, does their happiness increase? We now have 20 years of work showing that this kind of approach works. And we know from this 20 years of research what are the kinds of things you can do to be happier. And so I thought, this is what I'll do. I'll make a new class for Yale students. I'll teach a whole course on the science of happiness. I called it Psychology in the Good Life because I wanted it to sound cool to students. The good life sounds very exciting, and so students wanted to take it. But I also wanted the class to be a little bit different than a typical college class. And so it was a course that had two distinct parts. The first part was typical for an Ivy League class. It was a science class, so students heard about different studies. You'll hear about those studies as well today. So it was a class that had a kind of scientific component. But it also had a different component that was very special, which is that we had the students practice what they learned in the class. In other words, they weren't just hearing about the studies, they were taking action to change their life. And we did this in a funny way. The course had the normal course requirements of a typical Ivy League class. You know, it had a midterm and a final paper and so on. But the class also had what I called course rewirements, which is kind of a joke in English for requirements to rewirements. These are habits that are there to rewire students' practices, to really allow them to start behaving in a different way. And their rewirements were all these practices that you'll hear about in just a second that we know can really improve well-being. Things like taking time for gratitude, making social connections. I couldn't force students to do these habits because I couldn't give them a grade for meditating or being grateful, but I could put the practices in the syllabus. And it turns out that for the Yale students, that was enough. If you just list it in the things they're supposed to do, then the Yale students will do it. But just to get a sense of what these will entail, you'll hear more in a second. These are things like taking time to be grateful, to experience gratitude, taking time to make social connection and really hang out with other people, taking time to savor and really notice and enjoy the good experiences in your life, and even healthy practices, things like meditation, taking time to be present, and exercise, and even things like sleep. Those are all the things that the students had to do as part of these rewirements. And so that was the class. I presented the class to the Yale administrators, the folks that decide which courses get picked up. And they didn't have many comments, but at the time we didn't know how many students would take the class. I just put the syllabus together and then I kind of waited. I waited till the spring semester. I thought maybe 30 or 40 students would take the class because it was a new class, had never been taught before. You could imagine my shock when I came into the classroom and it looked like this. It was more than 40 people. On the first day of class, we had 800 students, and we had to teach the class in a university church because that was the only spot it fit. But then 400 more students decided to take the class, and we had to teach the class in a chapel. It's not in a university concert hall, that was where we had to teach it. It's not often that a college classroom looks this big, but that's the way I was teaching. And so I think this is important. I think this shows that this class really meant something to students. They don't like this culture of feeling stressed and feeling anxious, and they wanted to do something about it. So that's the quick story of the class. And as I said, I'm going to spend more time giving you the very quick version of the class. It has to be very quick, what these students learn in the class. And so to help it be as quick as possible, I'm going to give you the list version. In the US right now, we have lots of websites that they call listicles, which are like little short lists of things. You're going to get the short list. I'm going to give you the top 10 insights that students learn from the class. And all of these are going to be things that you can put into practice yourself to try to feel better. The first insight that we get from the science, the first part of this list, is that this hope of increasing our happiness over time, it's really possible. And that's the first tip, is that we can control more of our happiness than we think. In the US, there's a metaphor of whether you're a person that thinks about life as being a glass that's half full, everything is full, everything's exciting, or you're someone that thinks about life as a glass that's half empty, everything's depleted and so on. And even outside of this metaphor, you can see people who sometimes see life as being very good, they're very optimistic, and sometimes people see life as kind of sad. And people ask the question, where does that perspective come from? Is that something that's built into your genes? Are you just going to be a person who's kind of like a happy person or not? Maybe it's built in. Is that really the case? If so, that might be bad because it might mean that it's going to be hard to change it. So is that really the case? Well, in her book, she summarizes lots of genetic studies. These are usually studies that look at twins and compare identical twins versus fraternal twins and try to see the role that genes are really playing. And we could do a very long version of all that work because it's really exciting, but I'll take a very short version right now, which is that the research suggests that this idea that happiness is built into our genes is just simply wrong. There seems to be some of our happiness that is genetic. There is a heritable component of happiness, but it's much smaller than we tend to think. And that's really good news. That means that we can actually act on our happiness. It's not built into our genes. We can take action to make it a little bit better. The problem is that when we take action, we tend to do it a little bit differently. We tend to think that our happiness is something else. Well, maybe it's not in our genes, but maybe it's built off our circumstances. Maybe it's how much money we make. Maybe it's all the good things in our life. Maybe it's maximizing all the good things and getting rid of all the bad things. You know, in the US, we have this idea of, poop happens, the bad things happen. We get rid of all the bad things, and that's where happiness comes from. That's what we think the other part of happiness is. But that gets to our next tip that we learn in class, which is that idea is wrong. We think that life circumstances matter a lot for happiness, but it turns out that they matter a lot less than we think. The good things in life and the bad things, the circumstances, they don't impact our happiness as much as we think. How do we know this? Well, we know this from studies that have looked at people who had very good things happen and very bad things happen. And we can study what happens to their well-being after that occurs. This is a person who in the US has just won $758 million. And the question is she happier? The answer is that on this Tuesday that she won this money, yes, she's very happy. Look, she's smiling, she looks really excited. But if you come back 6 months later, 1 year later, what you find is that even with a large sum of money like this, people don't report being any happier than someone who played the lottery but didn't win. Now that's not what we think when we go to the yellow stores to play the lottery. We think it'll make us happier, but the research suggests that that's just not the case. Our mind is wrong. That's a good thing that happens. Now let's take a bad thing that happens. So imagine if you're lucky enough to be able to walk today. Imagine you leave this talk and you get hit by a car, and now you are paraplegic. You can't use your legs anymore. Question is, how does that affect your happiness? Well, if that happened tonight, this would be a pretty bad night. You would probably not be very happy at the end of the night if you went to the hospital and you were paraplegic. But what the research shows is that if you come back 6 months later, even a year later, people tend to report that they're just as happy as someone who didn't get hit by a car. In other words, even the worst of circumstances, they don't impact our happiness as much as we think. And so, getting back to our little chart here, it's not the genes that affect happiness, but it's also not our circumstances, good and bad. And that suggests something really interesting. What the research suggests is that happiness isn't about our genes, it's not about our circumstances, it's about our behaviors. It's about the way we think and do things in the world. That's where well-being really comes from. That That's the good news, but the good news comes with some bad news. And the bad news is that yes, you can impact your happiness with your behaviors, but like most good things in life, it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort. Here's how she sums up this idea. She says, it may be obvious that to achieve anything substantial in life, to learn a profession, to master a sport, to raise a child, you need a good deal of effort. A good deal of effort is required. She then goes on to say, research reveals that if you desire happiness, you need to go about it in a similar way. It's going to take permanent changes that require effort and commitment every day of your life. Just like most good things, you can achieve happiness, but it just takes work. You have to put the work in. And this is one of the reasons my class, on Twitter they have these hashtags, and they called the class the hashtag hardest class at Yale, which was kind of a joke because it wasn't as hard as like a computer science class or an economics class in terms of the exams. But it was a very hard class because if you wanted to achieve more happiness, if you wanted to increase your well-being, it was going to take some work. And so that's tip number 3. You can do it, you can improve your well-being, but it takes some work. The problem, though, as we'll see in the 4th tip, is that we tend to put in the wrong kind of work, and that's what messes us up. And that's because the research shows that our minds seem to lie to us a lot of the time about what makes us happy. We have these intuitions about the kinds of things that will feel good, but those intuitions are wrong. We have the wrong theories about what will make us happy. What's some of the evidence for this? What are spots where our minds lie to us? Because this is a kind of weird idea that our mind is giving us the wrong information. But many of you have seen other cases where your minds give you the wrong information. If you're like folks in the US, you might be excited about seeing things like visual illusions. Here's one that's called the snake circles. If you're looking at the black dots, it might look as though the circles are moving. That's not a feature of the presentation. The image is actually static. It's your eyes that see the circles as moving. And so that's a case where the image is static, but your eyes are lying to you. They're telling you it's moving when it's not. This happens a lot in our perceptual systems, like our vision lies to us a lot. And that can be kind of enjoyable. We like seeing these visual illusions. But it's not as funny when our minds are lying to us about what makes us happy. But the research shows that just like a visual illusion, we have illusions about the things that will make us feel good. What's one of the spots where we have that illusion? The case of money. You just heard the lottery example that people predict having more money will make them happy, but the research suggests that that's just simply not the case. People definitely think money is going to make them happier. Here's just one study from the US where students who went into college across time were asked what's very important in life. And they were asked what different things that were important. And here's the graph for how important is it for you to be very well off financially, to be rich. And what you find is that in the 1960s, people didn't think it was that important to be rich, but nowadays they see this as very important. And this is interesting when you contrast it with a different question, the question of how important is it to develop a meaningful philosophy on life? That one, sadly, it seems to go down over time. So I think this is interesting that as money gets important, our philosophy gets worse, right? But that's what people think. Is there really a point at which money does make you happier? Is that true? We can analyze that scientifically. And that's just what researchers have tried to look at. They've asked people, how much money do you need? So you can imagine this, right? If I asked you on your annual salary check, how much money would you need to be happy? So you'd have so much money that if you got more, it wouldn't make you any happier. So researchers have asked this in the US right now. They asked in the US people who are currently earning $30,000, which is like a little bit below the national average, how much money would you need to be happy? And these folks, when they're asked, say that what they need is around $50,000. That would make them happy. And so, in theory, we should be able to ask the people who are earning $50,000 right now, are you happy? And they should say, yes, I don't need any more money. I have all that I need, right? Researchers do one better. They ask folks who are currently earning $100,000, are you happy? These folks should say, yes, I'm very happy. I have twice as much as I need. But they don't say that. They say that what they need is $250,000. And so this is kind of funny because it suggests that we never get to the goal, but more scary is that the goal gets further away the closer we get to it. So it's not just that we don't get there, the goal gets further away as we get more money. But that's what people think. We can ask what really impacts happiness. If we were measuring people's happiness at different salary levels, is there a point at which it would just kind of be enough? We'd have all that we need. And so I'm going to show you their graph, which is a little complicated, but I'll walk you through it. What you're looking at is people's income. This is in the US right now, on this axis. And note that it's a logarithmic scale, which means there's big jumps. So $10,000 to $20,000 is a small jump, then you jump from 20 to 40, and so on. The other thing they're plotting, all those dashed lines right there, are different measures of people's well-being. This bottom one over here is whether or not people are reporting feeling stressed. The middle one is when people are reporting not feeling blue, so not having negative emotions. And the top one is people's positive affect, when people report feeling happy and feeling positive and so on. And what you see is that all those three measures of well-being do go up as salary increases when you earn very little money. So if you earn very little money and you get more, yes, that will make you happier. But all of those measures of well-being seem to kind of level off. And in the US right now, they all level off at a certain point, which is around $75,000 US dollars. That means in the US right now, if you earn $75,000, even if I triple your salary, you won't increase your well-being. You won't get any happier. Now, we don't have the corresponding amounts here in Taiwan, but my guess is that it's pretty similar, that the amount of money you really need to feel happy is way less high than you think. And so that's one way our minds lie to us. We don't need as much money as we think, but it turns out we also don't need the things that money buys as much as we think. So we sometimes think that to be happy we need a really huge house, a really big house or a really nice car and so on. It turns out that there is a correlation between materialism, so you're the kind of person that seeks out material goods. There's a correlation between that and happiness, but that correlation is negative. In other words, the more materialistic you are, the less happy you are, right? And that's not what we think, but it's what the research really suggests. And so this becomes really important because the work is suggesting that we have these ideas about what will make us happy, but those ideas are wrong. Our mind is telling us lies. And so that means we can become happier, but we need to prioritize the right things, not money and material possessions, other things. And so the question is, what are those other things? What are the things that really work, that really do work for improving our happiness? And that is what the rest of the tips I'll tell you about are showing. Those are the behaviors that the studies with happy people really show actually increase our happiness. And so one of those things that increase our happiness that we see is something that's very common, but we forget about a lot of time. And that gets us to tip number 5. One of the things that we know increases happiness is when we make time for social connections, when we hang out with the people that we care about. Every available study of those happy people finds that happy people tend to be more social. They report spending more time with other people, and they report spending more time with their friends and family members. Just so you can see one study of this, because I'm a professor, so I like to give you all the studies. Here's a study by Ed Diener and Marty Seligman. It does the typical thing where they find happy people, and they're going to ask happy people, how do you spend your time? And you can pick on a scale from 0 to 10 how much you spend your time. And so they ask these people different questions. Rate your daily activities on this scale from 1 to 10, and they're going to compare the happy folks and the unhappy folks. And when you ask the happy folks and the unhappy folks how much time you spend alone, what you find is that the unhappy people are spending more time by themselves. They're spending more time alone. But if you look at how much time people are spending with their friends and family members and loved ones, what you find is that the happy people are doing that more often. And this looks like a small difference, but it's actually a big difference. Happy people are spending more time with others. And so we can ask the question, does that mean if you're not happy, and we force you to hang out with other people, will that make you happier, right? And that's actually what researchers have done to test this. And they've done this in a very strange way. They force people to hang out with total strangers. So you can imagine this. Imagine you're on a train here in Taiwan, and I say, you have to talk to one of the people who's sitting next to you on the train. You have to try to make a social connection with one of those people. Would it make you happier? And he had people take part in one of 3 different conditions. In one condition, people on this public transport would have to make a connection. They were asked, for the rest of the train ride, try to have a conversation with the person next to you, right? Other people were asked to do just the opposite. That was the solitude condition. They were told, for the rest of the train ride, just keep to yourself and enjoy your solitude. And because Nick is a kind of nerd, like a scientist like me, he also has the control condition, which is that people are just told, do what you would normally do on the train, right? He knows though, Nick knows that people's minds lie to them. And so he also had a condition where instead of doing this in real life, people had to predict what they thought would happen. And so that's the graph I'm going to show you first. We're going to be measuring how positive people think this is. So bigger bars is more positive. Nick has shown that this effect still holds even for introverts. So in other words, even the introverts show the same effect. It's just that the introverts have an even stronger prediction that the connection won't feel good. And that's one of the reasons they don't do it. And so all these studies together suggest that we need to be taking more time to connect with the people around us. That's the kind of thing that makes us feel good. But even when there's so many people around us, we tend not to do that. And so that's the important tip you can take from this. Try to talk to other people. Even in connection with strangers will feel better than you expect. Number 6. And that comes from work showing that if we want to be happier, then we should be helping other people. That helping other people makes us happier than we expect to be. But if you look at happy people, that's not what happy people do. Happy people tend to spend time focusing on others. They give more money to charity, and they spend more time volunteering. And so we can ask whether or not making people think about others, making people help others, improves their happiness. Again, we can force people to help others and see if they get happier. And that's what they did in their study. They walk up to people on the street and hand them some money. They first ask, do you want to be in a study? And they make people rate their happiness. So people take a happiness scale on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you feeling right now? Then people are given money. They're given either $5 Canadian or $20 Canadian, and they're asked to spend it, but they have to spend it in a particular way. They either have to spend it on themselves, so they have to do some self-care and treat themselves, or they have to spend it on someone else. They have to do something nice with that money for someone else. And they agree that at the end of the day, the researchers are going to call them back. They're going to do that happiness test again, and we're going to see how happiness changes. That's the prediction. And what people predict is that spending money on yourself is going to feel better than spending money on other people. You know, it makes sense. You get something out of it. People also predict that spending $20 will feel better than spending $5 because it's more money, right? So it feels like it should feel better. That's what people predict. But what really happens is very different. What really happens is that spending the money on other people feels better when I call you at the end of the day, and even when I call you at the end of the week. That's the condition that makes us feel good. It makes us feel better than spending the money on ourselves. The other thing the research shows is that it doesn't matter how much money you spend. It seems like it's just the act of doing something nice for someone else. That's what feels good. And so the research suggests that when we're feeling down, we shouldn't try to do something nice for ourselves. Being so selfish isn't making us as happy as we think. We need to become other-oriented. We need to start thinking about other people and what we can do for them. And that's one of the reasons I love so much that a lot of the proceeds of this event is actually going to help other people. So all of you right now, by sitting here, are doing something nice for someone else. So hopefully that will boost your happiness just a little bit. I think we'll hear about that a little bit more at the end of the lecture today. But that's tip number 6. We should be doing nice things for other people. Now we get to tip number 7, another thing that's getting tricky. It's hard for us to think about. And right now, by the way, since we're in the Yale class, you're at the midterm. You know, this is when I give you your midterm exam, so it's coming up. Be ready for it, right? But that gets us to tip number 7, which is that we should be making time for gratitude. That is what happy people do. Happy people tend to experience thankfulness a lot of the time. If you ask them how their day is going, they will say, well, I'm really grateful. Everything's going well. They focus on the things they're grateful for. That's what happy people do. And so the question is, can we force people to experience gratitude, and will that improve their mood? And that's just what researchers have done. It's a really easy way to do it. You just have subjects at the end of the day write down 3 to 5 things that they're grateful for. Just scribble it down at the end of the day. And what you find is that just within just 2 weeks, this practice can improve people's well-being. You get statistical increases in your well-being for taking time to experience gratitude, which is pretty impressive. But there's an even more powerful effect of gratitude that comes from something else, which comes not just from privately thinking about what you're grateful for, but trying to share your gratitude with other people, like thanking people. Because often the things we're grateful for are other people. That's what we're grateful for many times. But we tend not to thank people and express our gratitude a lot. But the research suggests that if we did that, it would be even more powerful. And here's where we have the midterm exam. Why is telling someone you're grateful so powerful? Well, if you were listening, you would know that telling someone you're thankful means you're experiencing gratitude, and that's good, that boosts your happiness. It means you're making a social connection, because you have to talk to someone, so that's good. And it means you're doing something nice for someone else, because people like it when you thank them, right? So you get all 3 of these things that boost your well-being. And so we should expect to see a very big effect on happiness from expressing gratitude. And we do, but even seeing these numbers a lot, I'm still shocked by how big the effect is. And I'll show you that right now. This was a study by Marty Seligman and colleagues, and he had subjects do what he calls a gratitude visit. Here's what subjects were asked to do. In the next week, write a letter of gratitude to someone who has helped you or has been especially kind to you, but has never properly been thanked. Then deliver that letter in person to the person in question. And then, if you want, you can even read the letter to that person. What do people predict? When I showed my students this slide, I had a lot of students start laughing. In fact, one student screamed out emo, which is sort of slang for like too emotional, like, like be very weird, right? That's what people think. What really happens is that the people who receive these letters often say it was one of the best moments of their lives. Like it meant that much to them to hear someone thank them that hadn't thanked them. So the person who receives this gets a big jump in happiness. But we're more concerned with what happens to your happiness, the person who writes the letter. And that's what this graph is. It's showing you, the white bar is showing you the boost in happiness you get from gratitude versus a control where I just have you write down your memories. And so this is what the bar looks like for your happiness before you write the letter. Here's what happens immediately after you write the letter, which is pretty impressive. You get a big bump in your reported happiness. But what's amazing is that if you look over time, that increase in your happiness lasts for a very long time. It lasts for about between 1 to 3 months, which is really incredible. Now we get to top insight number 8, another thing that's very hard for us to do, but that's very important, which is that we should be taking time for healthy practices. What do I mean by healthy practices? I mean the kinds of things that we know are good for our physical health, but we forget are important for our mental health. One of those things that we see as being very important is taking time to exercise. We know exercise is good for our hearts, but we forget that it can be good for our brains and for our emotions. Research shows that a half hour of cardio exercise every morning can be as effective as a prescription of Zoloft, which is the leading antidepressant medication in the US for reducing depression symptoms. Just a half hour of cardio every day. That's what your doctor could prescribe you. We know it's good for our physical health, but we forget that it's good for our mental health. But there's another healthy activity that's even more important, and that's very tough for my college students, which is sleep. I have to explain what this picture is to my college students because they don't know. Like, this is sleep. That's what you're supposed to be doing every night. That's why when they come to class, they look all sleepy and tired. We know sleep is important for physical health, but we forget how important it is for mental health. And here's just one study on this. This is by Dinguez and colleagues. They have subjects come into a sleep lab and they test their mood over different days. And they do this after 2 days of normal sleep. Normal sleep, by the way, is 7 to 8 hours a night. That's what we're supposed to be getting. So you sleep normally for 2 days, and then you have deprived sleep. For 7 days in a row, you only get between 4 and 5 hours of sleep, about 4.98 hours. And note that this is what most young people are getting regularly. This is typical for a college student in the US right now. But you do this for a week, and then you go back to normal sleep for 2 days. The question is, what happens to your mood levels? Right? Do they go down over time? And so I'll show you the graph. It's plotting a measure that researchers call a profile of mood score. All you have to know is that bigger numbers is a happier mood. And as we get towards the low part of the graph, you have a mood that looks like you have clinical depression. And this is what happens over just 1 week of deprived sleep. Basically, by the end of the week, your mood is low enough that you look like you have clinical depression after a single week. And this is what many of our young people are doing chronically. They're doing this all the time. I actually think we could solve a lot of the mental health crisis in young people if we just got them to sleep. But if that wasn't important enough to convince you that sleep is important, I'll show you one more graph from the news site, the Huffington Post, about what happens when you don't get sleep. So this is after a single night of no sleep. You're hungrier and you're apt to eat more. You're more likely to have an accident. Things are dangerous. You're not looking your best. You're not as approachable. You're more likely to catch a cold. So you see immune function go down. You actually can lose brain tissue, so I can see significant losses in brain tissue after a single night of no sleep. In addition, you're more likely to get emotional, and you're less focused, you're having memory problems. So many of my students think they'll stay up at night to study and not sleep so they'll remember for their test, but it's the opposite, like the brain just doesn't work that way. So that's after one night. This is what happens after a while, which is what a lot of our young people are doing chronically. Your risk of death goes up, your sperm count decreases, your heart disease risk increases, your diabetes risk goes up, your risk of cancers goes up, your obesity risk jumps, and your stroke risk quadruples. Right? So we forget that sleep can be really important. What I tell my students is like, just sleep. I know there's parties and I know there's studying and things to do, but just get some sleep. So that is top insight number 8. We need to be making time for these healthy practices. We need to remember that they're important for our mental health as well. Now we're kind of still cruising through the semester. We're already at top insight number 9, getting to the end of the class of our top 10 insights. This one is one that's very hard for people in the modern age, but happy people do it all the time, which is that happy people know that being in the present moment is the happiest way to be. They need to be mindful and they need to be present. What does it mean to be present? Because I think this is something that people talk about, but we forget what it means. It means to notice what it feels like to be you in your body right now. So if most of you are sitting down, what does the seat feel like on your bottom? Like, how does it feel? How are you breathing right now? Are you breathing in? Or are you breathing out? Most of you will be somewhere in that breath cycle, but where are you, right? We don't take time to notice that because we tend to be noticing all these other things. Our mind is going off in all these directions. Here's my favorite physical representation of that. When your mind is wandering, you're thinking about dinner tomorrow or that fight you had with someone a few weeks ago. Like, we're not present because we're thinking about all this other stuff. Researchers wanted to estimate how often we spend doing this. In other words, how often are we not thinking about the present moment? And so they gave people a little cell phone app that would buzz at different times of the day, and they asked people 3 questions. What are you doing right now? Are you paying attention to what you're doing? And how are you feeling? And what they find is that when they ask people, are you paying attention? No matter what the activity is, most of the time, people are not really paying attention. So just under half the time, 46.9% of the time, people say they're not paying attention and their minds are wandering. What's interesting is people say that no matter what the activity is. And you only get a slight decrease for one activity, and that's when people say that they report they were having sex, which I find funny. That means people got a ping on their cell phone. What are you doing? I am having sex. Are you paying attention? Yes. Seems weird, but anyway. But so it's very bad. We're not paying attention. We're like missing half our lives, which is kind of bad. But it's even worse for our well-being. As it turns out, whenever we're mind wandering, we're feeling less happy. And that's what comes from this other graph. As I mentioned, the researchers asked, on a scale from 0 to 100, where 100 is feeling really good, how are you feeling? And they measured how people were feeling in different kinds of mind wandering, because we can mind wander to different things. We can mind wander, as the circle all the way on the right shows, to unpleasant things. So you're thinking about a fight you had, or you're thinking about your taxes or a bill, that's not good. You can mind wander, as in the second dot, to neutral things up there, where you're just thinking about lunch or something. You can even mind wander to pleasant things, that's that third dot in the middle, where you're thinking about a vacation or something good. But all of those kinds of mind wandering feel worse than simply not mind wandering at all. No matter what you're paying attention to, it feels good just to pay attention. And so the question is, how can we stop the mind wandering, right? How can we stop our brains from naturally doing that all the time? It turns out there are two techniques you can use to do that. One is one that doesn't take any practice. You can just turn it on at any point. And it's what researchers call the act of savoring, taking time to notice what you're feeling, especially if you're having some good experience. So if you're eating an ice cream cone, you can ask, what does this taste like? How would I describe this? What's the smell? What's the color? It's just the act of taking a moment to pay attention to what it feels like. Often when we treat ourselves, the reason that doing something nice for ourselves doesn't feel as good as we expect is because we do those things, but we don't even notice it. But there's a second practice that reduces that mind wandering, that helps you pay attention, that's almost like exercising. It's a muscle that you strengthen over time. And that's the practice of meditation. Taking time to be present, to watch your breath, and to force it. Research shows that the act of meditating for 10 minutes every day doesn't just reduce your mind wandering while you're meditating. It also helps reduce your mind wandering throughout the day. And so it's like exercising when you exercise with weights, and then you can pick up heavier things later. The same seems to be true of meditation. It reduces mind wandering even weeks later when you've done it. And the research shows that it can start up very quickly. So if you've never meditated before, even the act of doing so for about 10 minutes a day can reduce activity in the regions of your brain that mind wander within about 2 weeks. So it kicks in very fast, but you still have to do it. And so that is top insight number 9. We need to find more ways to be present. We need to stop our wandering minds, and we need to practice things that can help us do so. Okay, so now we're getting all the way to the end of the semester. We've gotten there, we're like at our final exam, which is very exciting. We're at top insight number 10, but it's an insight that's one of the hardest ones. And that insight is that if you want to be like happy people, you should try to become wealthy, you should become rich. You should become rich not in money, but in time. This is the slide that if my students are sleeping for the semester and they hear, you should become wealthy, they're like, yeah, that's what I was thinking, like the lottery. They're like, no, different. Because what you need to become rich in is time, free time, having time to do things. This is a new idea that researchers have called time affluence, this idea of time wealth. It's the opposite of what we often call time famine, where you're hungry for time, you just don't have any time available. Research shows that happy people tend to prioritize their free time. In fact, they'll give up money to get access to more time. They'll spend money on things that save them some time because they know that time is really important. And we know this from lots of studies, but here's just one so you can see the study in practice. This is work by Ashley Willens, who's a professor at Harvard Business School. And she asked, who are you more like? Are you a person who chases after money, like this person on the left? So you'll spend more hours at work to try to get more money. You'll kind of spend more time to save money and so on. Are you more like that guy? Or are you more like this guy on the right, who's chasing after time? You'll give up some money, you'll work less hours so that you can have more time. Maybe you'll take your vacation time instead of going to work. Who are you more like? And what she finds on a 5-point happiness scale is that the people who report chasing after money are less happy than the people who report chasing after time. And this is on a scale that's out of 5 points. And so it's actually a really big effect. We need to be paying more attention to our wealth in terms of time than we often do. And here's where I can't help but end with a story from my class. The Yale students got a much longer version of this lecture. They had a whole class, an hour and a half on time affluence because there are many studies there. And I thought that was very ironic. It was sad that I was going to spend an hour and a half to teach them about time affluence because they're so time famished. They're hungry for time. And so I did something creative, which is that students came to class, like you walked into this lecture today, and my teaching assistants were handing out sheets of paper that explained, today's lecture is about time affluence, and to teach you what that is, I'm going to give you some time. There's no class today. Class is canceled. And I knew students would be so kind of shocked by this. I gave them a list of things they could do. It's like, you could meditate, you could take a nap, you could talk with a friend, and so on. What was incredible was how students reacted. I mean, students were overjoyed. You thought I would have given them like millions of dollars to get this extra time, right? But what was more sad was that two of the students burst into tears. They started crying. And one of the students who started crying said, it was the first free hour she's had all semester, right? And we can all start to feel like that because we pack our schedules in, but give yourself a gift of time. The extra credit homework is go into your calendar tonight, maybe even like a few months from now, and block off a couple hours, right? Time affluence, you know, Yale professor said time affluence. And I watch, when you get to that moment in your calendar, watch how free it makes you feel, how happy it is. That's what it feels like when we give ourselves a little time. Okay, so we made it through the whole semester, and you did it, all the insights from the class. And so now I just wanted to end with a quick story before we get to questions about what happened next. Because I thought I was just teaching the students in my residential college, where I was head of college, about happiness. I didn't realize that this journey would take me all over the world, including to Taiwan, to talk about wellness. Because the class ended up starting more of a movement than I expected. If you remember my story, I said that I only expected 40 or so students to take the class. I wasn't prepared for this many people to want to take the class. The class went viral on campus. But then the class went viral beyond campus. About 2 weeks into the class, there was an article in the New York Times about the class. And the general thesis of the article was, so many Yale students are so unhappy, they need a class about happiness. But the article was kind of like, well, what about the rest of us? These are students who are at Yale, they're 19, they're healthy, they're at an Ivy League school, and they're so miserable they need a class on happiness? Like, the rest of us need that class too, was the kind of idea. And that launched a whole series of press in the US, where this class went viral in the US media. But then the class went viral worldwide, and these are all articles in languages I don't speak about the class, so if you speak these languages, you can tell me what it's saying. But basically, I realized that it's not just Yale students who need this class. People around the world are worried about their happiness and really want tips for how to do better. And I think that makes sense, because what we know is that our minds are lying to us. We're all working very hard at becoming happier, but we're doing it wrong. And I think that's where the science helps. When you see these graphs and you see what happy people really do, you get better tips. You learn what you really should be doing. Yeah, I see this a lot in my students, right? These Yale students are very intense. So sometimes they'll take the course and they'll be like, I have to get happy. They're very stressed. They're as stressed as their grades and their exams and things. That said, I think when you hear what happiness is really about, which is taking time off, taking time to be present, not worrying about yourself, but doing nice things for others. If you're really listening to what the science says, it suggests you don't want to get all stressed about becoming happy yourself. If you're following what it suggests, then you move further away from being stressed out by it. And that's what I like the science, that even if you're a very intense person, you're like, I'm going to be happy myself, you realize the path to that is the opposite of being stressed, and it's the opposite of focusing on yourself.
We have two related questions, and the first is that what is your view on social media? Because you want to make more connections. I think it's asking that social media counts as more connections. It's a little bit long. You just read the book, Lost in Connection. And he was fascinated with the concept, and basically his question is that how can this generation overcome the issue that technology might actually shrink our happiness and make us more depressed?
At the basic level, technology is just a tool. We can use it to promote our happiness or to decrease it. What is it usually doing? Well, I mean, these questions hit on it. It really is hurting our social connection. You know, we could use the phone to call a family member that we haven't seen in a long time, but more often we're using the phone to scroll through while we're on a train and not talking to someone, or you're at dinner with your partner and you're not paying attention to them because you have your phone. And that's just the social part. I think technology and social media in particular can also hurt other parts of happiness. So gratitude, how grateful are you when you're looking at Instagram and all the rich people and all your friends' photos? Does that make you feel grateful about your life? Sleep is another one. In the US right now, the statistic is that 85% of 15-year-olds sleep with their cell phone beside them in bed. And it's because it's their alarm clock for many people, right? So it's really nearby, but that can prevent sleep. And so I think in general, technology could be used to promote these things, but right now it's really hurting a lot of these things, especially social connection. And the most scary thing is that I think we're only starting to learn how bad technology is for social connection. Liz Dunn, the researcher you saw her picture before, she also does a lot of work on how technology affects our social interactions. But again, not on social media, just like having a phone like we have out here. Turns out that when you can see your phone, when it's out, you smile at people around you 30% less, right? Which makes sense because you're paying attention to your phone. You're kind of casually glancing down at it. You're less active. And that's just one statistic. I think to me as a psychologist, it's very scary that 6 billion people have this technology in their pockets now, and we don't know how it's affecting our social interaction. If anything, it's probably not good for it, so it's worrying. But I think the optimistic view is that we can be using technology for positive things. We just need to get creative about how we use it. Well, it depends on how you use social media. So if I go on social media and social media is tricky. I think if I go on, say, like FaceTime or an app like that, where you're talking in real time to people, and it allows you to connect with people you can't see in real life, then it's good. But most of the way we use social media, which is not in real life connection, not in real time, where you're talking in real time, that doesn't really give us the connection we need. It's almost like, I joke that it's like the NutraSweet, like the fake sugar of social connection. It tastes, we feel like it's social connection, but it doesn't give us the real kind of connection, nutrition we need. And that's very dangerous because it means, I'm tempted to do it, right? When I'm in a line with other people that I could be talking to, I'm tempted to pull out my phone and scroll Instagram. And I think it's making me connected, but it's actually the opposite. It's making me more lonely.
Are there really research about more social media and less happiness? Is there a connection?
Yeah, there's growing work. There's not as much work as you think, especially given how ubiquitous, how popular it is. It's hard to do those studies because everyone is doing it right now. Imagine finding a college student that had never used social media, like as a control. Like they would be a little weird. There's no control group, or if there was, they would be, weird for other reasons, right? So it's hard to do the right studies. What we do know is that when you do small studies, when you intervene and make people use social media more, they tend to get more depressed, more anxious, and more unhappy. When you get people off social media, they tend to get happier. But all those studies are small. We need bigger studies and bigger work. But the hints right. Yeah, I think it's funny. But that said, I think technology, technology realizes that this is a danger. That's why if any of you have the new iPhone, your iPhone will tell you how much you're on your iPhone, right? I don't think anyone has looked at that and said, oh, I need to be on my iPhone more often. That's like everyone wants to reduce. And so my hope is that both social media giants and people who create technology are realizing this is a problem, and they're going to build in more tools to help us connect more in real life.
Okay, my kids are sitting there, so listen, no more social media.
No more social media. One of the requirements is I have my students, I suggest that they get off social media. That's too hard. One thing I tell them is just take the apps off your phone. So it's a little bit harder for you to go on. You don't go on as instinctively. And many of my college students report that it makes them happier, that they talk to their friends more, or that they're shocked that their friends aren't talking to them. You know, they don't have it when they're in the dining hall and sitting around to eat, and everyone else is, and like, wait, I'm not. It makes you notice how addicted you were.
The next question asks you to give your comments for a John Lennon quote. The quote says, when I was 5 years old, my mother always told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wrote down happy, and they told me I didn't understand the assignment. And I told them they didn't understand life.
No, I think that's important. I think, so many of us care about our happiness, and we can think that that's a little, like fluffy, like it's not important in life. But the research even suggests that's wrong. It turns out that happiness seems to be causally linked to lots of things we care about. So you can measure someone's happiness in middle school. This is work done in the US, where you measure how happy someone is at 15 years old, and that predicts the salary they're going to make at 30 years old. Right? So we think happiness is this fluffy thing, but it predicts your income level. It predicts whether or not you'll have a successful marriage. So if I measure how much you're smiling in your high school yearbook photos, the photos we have in high school, I can predict at 50 how happy you're going to be in your marriage. And if I analyze your diaries in your 20s, this was a study that was done with Catholic nuns, you look at people's diaries in their 20s, it predicts who's going to live into their 90s or not. So we think happiness is this, it's a fluffy thing, but it might just philosophically be the most important thing in life, as Lenin said, but it might be causally related to other things we care about in terms of public health, longevity, job success. Like we think that job success and health give us happiness, but we have the relationship backwards. It might be happiness that lets us be successful. Happier students get better grades. Like the causal arrow is the other way.
Okay. Next question here says that, as in English. So, through all your speeches and your courses, did you observe any different in culture, like between Asian and maybe Western?
Yeah. So people often ask about cultural differences, and in terms of people's reported happiness, there are lots of cultural differences. Some of you may have seen this World Happiness Report that ranks countries by happiness. I haven't looked at where Taiwan is, but I think it's higher than the US right now, so you're doing good. The US is very bad. But if you look at what's causing the differences across countries, it's not that there's a different philosophy on what happiness is and so on. It's that countries vary in how much they naturally do these things. Like some countries are more social. Like some countries are more focused on charity. Some countries have more time off. Think of Scandinavian countries, which are often at the top of the list. They have whole months where they're kind of cuddled and drinking hot chocolate and just kind of taking time off, time away from work and so on. And so it seems like there are different notions, like there's some differences there, but these traits that I told you about seem to be universal. It's not like social connection works more in Western countries than in Eastern countries. Like those seem to be built-in things about all humans that make us happier.
I swear I did not ask this question. My wife is sitting down there.
I'm very scared, I can't read it. So
Does marriage has to be unhappy?
So the data on marriage are interesting. As usual, it kind of depends. So one thing to know is that as people are about to get married, when you first get married, there's a big bump in happiness. But like all good things, like all circumstances, like the lottery and so on, you get kind of bored with it over time. You get adapted to it. It's what scientists call hedonic adaptation. So there's a bump up when you get married, but it goes down. It goes down more if you have children. Sorry for people out there. The good news is it doesn't have to be that way. All these things I was talking about, being present, taking time to savor, that can bump up how happy you are in the relationship. One technique researchers have for doing that is a process called negative visualization, which is this idea of imagine the counterfactual. Like, what would it be like if you didn't have your partner? This is a really powerful one with kids, which can stop your adaptation to your kids. So if you're a parent in the room, imagine that the last time you saw your child was the last time you're ever going to see your child. Like, pick whatever tragedy you want, but that's it. They're gone from your life. My guess is the next time you see them, you're going to hug them a little bit tighter, right? And that negative visualization took like 2 seconds to just remember how grateful you are. But we just don't take time to do that. And so you can do that in your marriage. Hopefully when you imagine your life without your wife, you'll sad, if not, different things. But yeah, I think we need to fight these things because we get used to stuff. It takes work, but it can make you happier.
This is a question for your personal experience. What was the most difficult thing you have to overcome for your personal experience on the journey of knowing how to be happy?
Yeah, I think I would even say 2 hard things to overcome. One is our intuitions about what really makes us happy are very strong. I teach this class, I've seen all these graphs. It's hard for me to believe that I would not be happier if I went to one of the yellow stores and played the lottery and won a lot of money. I still think I would be happier that way. I still think that if I had a huger house, that I would be happy. I still think that if I'm on the train talking to someone, it's gonna, feel a little weird. Even when you know what you're supposed to do, it doesn't change what you think. And I think that's a real challenge because you can know what to do, but it's not your instinct. You have to put work in. And that gets to the second thing, which is it just takes work. And that work is making sure you do it every day, like other healthy habits. If you're learning an instrument, you just have to practice every day. You can't play the violin once and then you know how to do it. You just have to keep practicing. And happiness works the same way. You can get it, but it takes practice. And that's a bummer. It'd be easier if happiness, you did it once, talk to someone once and then you're just happy forever. That'd be good. But that's just not how it works.
The next question says, when I face a friend or a colleague with a lot of negative emotions and I have to deal with the problem he's telling me about himself, how do I comfort him? And how do I help myself not to be dragged into that emotion?
Yeah. So this is a common problem. We talk about it in the course. In fact, we have a whole episode on this in the podcast about what's called emotional contagion, which is that another not good feature of our happiness is that we can catch the happiness of others. So if you're around someone who's negative, you can catch that. The way that's most salient for me is in an office setting. Many of us, if you work in an office, there's that one person who's like, and if you're around that person, you can catch it, right? And so it can be really scary. The good news is that emotional contagion works both ways. And so if you're around someone that's negative and you can force yourself to be positive, you can put that work in, that can be catchy to the other person too. So we're not powerless in this. And I think this is really important, not just for thinking about friendships and how to make our friends happy. It's also important on social media. Why does social media make us depressed? Because when you scroll through, there's just so much negativity about politics, negativity about But your posts don't have to be that way. You can be the seed that starts what researchers call an affective spiral. Like, if you post one good thing and someone else posts something good and it can spiral into goodness. And so I think realize that you have some agency, you have some control over the emotions out there, and that your emotions can affect others too.
I think this is a funny one. When you see more than 800 students sitting in the class, are you happy? Especially when you think about you have to grade their exams and homeworks. I also wonder, how do you grade their homeworks?
Yeah, well, we had some teaching assistants, but the logistics of the class were just kind of insane. I mean, The classroom was hard. We had to teach in a concert hall, so we had to figure out a way that we could show slides. We had to figure out a way that students could write, because like these desks, there's no place to write, so for an exam, it was really hard. We ended up having to host the midterm in 19 different other classrooms on campus that had desks. And so when we had the midterm, I had to go between all of them. It was, I think, 3.4 miles. I put on exercise clothes and I was sprinting between them to make it to all of them. But I think it is humbling. I think, when I see so many people here, so many people in the classroom, it means that people need these insights. Like me, I need these insights. It's one of the reasons I teach the class, and the hope is that it's really fun and it's meaningful to give people these tools. So it does make me happier.
Okay, great. I think this question asked about, because you emphasize the role of having a good sleep.
Yeah.
How does dreaming affect that?
Yeah, so usually if you're dreaming, it means that you're in the process of REM sleep. So that's often, even if your dreams aren't great, it's often a good sign that you are getting the right sleep that you have. Sometimes for me, I can experience this if I've not practicing what I preach and I haven't gotten a good night's sleep, and you finally sleep, you have all these dreams that you remember. That's a sign that your brain is playing catch up. It's trying to get more REM sleep because you haven't had a lot. So typically dreams are a good sign. It means you're doing it right, your brain's getting the sleep it needs.
Here it says, also in English, I'm just not an optimistic person.
Mm-hmm.
So is it possible for me to change my personality by doing the stuff you suggested? Or I'm just pretending to be happy?
Yeah, no. The beauty is even if you go along, I have a lot of people who take the online class who are very skeptical. I get lots of skeptics, which is fun. And they say, I'm going to try this stuff, but I'm not an optimistic person. It's not going to work. What you find is when you start doing this stuff, it works. That's what the science suggests. Even if you don't believe in it, you just try it, you kind of feel better. Again, we tend to think that happiness is one of two things. It's built in, we're optimists or not, or it's our circumstances. You're rich or you're not, we don't. But that's just not what the data suggests. If you try it, even if you don't believe it, try it and see. And I can just tell you there's so many people who, 400,000 people who've taken this class will report they feel better. In fact, now we're starting to get scientific data on the people who take the online class. We didn't know to do that for the live class. But in the online class, you can opt in to take a happiness survey at the beginning and at the end. And so far, it's not published yet, but what we're finding is that people are reporting a whole point increase on a 1 to 10 happiness scale. So you start out, you're a 5 or a 6 out of happiness, and then at the end, you're a 7 out of 8. And so I think it works. Yeah, so Matthew Ricard is a Buddhist monk who is also known in science because he's helped popularize a lot of Buddhist practices, including being present, mindfulness, charity, gratitude, these kinds of things. And I think there's either a book or a documentary, I forget which, that calls him the happiest man in the world.
And now you're the happiest woman.
Happiest woman. No, I'm not. I'm working on it. But I haven't done as much, for example, meditation practice as Matthew Ricard. And I think, but people of his tradition also do a lot of what's called compassion meditation. So you're thinking about how I can help others. You become much more other-oriented. And so they're hitting, and they're also very time affluent because they're not so overscheduled and so on. So I think people who, like Matthew Ricard, who do these practices are doing all the things that improve happiness. So it's no surprise that they're happy.
Here, English. I think a student is asking, how can they initiate a movement in their school or educational system to make everybody happier? Is there any tips about it?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. I'm happy someone asked, because if you think about what our school systems prioritize, it's grades, it's studying so you can get a certain job, it's not sleeping, it's not social connection, it's where moving away from the things that really make us happy. And I think that's one of the reasons we see some of the most unhappiness in students who are in elite schools. My Yale students have worked really hard to get there. They're, in some instances, they're the best of the best, but they're the most depressed. And so I think we're really doing something wrong. I think we need to think more about what we can do to make education more consistent with, what John Lennon said, what really matters. You might get the assignment but not understand life. I think a lot of our school systems are doing that. And so, but it's hard, right? Even this class at Yale had grades, right? I had to grade my students. They had to take exams. I knew that would make them stressed, but that's just what Ivy League schools do. So I think we do need some structural reform from on high to think critically about what we really want our children's lives to be like, and if the educational system is doing that. especially when we learn that people who are unhappy are going to earn less. Right? If you're unhappy in medical school, you're going to earn less in your 30s. People who are unhappy get worse grades. There's a causal arrow of being depressed to getting worse grades over time. We need to kind of think about what we're really doing by having a system of education that's so stressful, and if we might be doing something that's counterproductive.
Questions. First one is that, is there any scientific research that shows which age group is the most happiest? Mm-hmm. And the second, how can we help those with highly depressed patients to make them happy?
Yeah, so in terms of which age group is happier, we have a little data there. It's good news for those of us that are getting up there.
0 to 2.
No, well, we don't have good data on 0 to 2. They can't fill out the survey, so yeah. We know, what we do know is that in adult years, people are happiest when they're older. So people who are retired, people who are elderly are happier. You know, your body falls apart, it's not good, but that's one thing you can look forward to. When you get older, you tend to be happier. But the reason isn't that old age is kind of happier by definition. The reason I think is that older individuals are doing more of this stuff. You know, you're retired, so you have more time. Like, you're spending more time with your family and on things that matter. You're often doing things like charity and thinking about other groups. You're participating in religious groups and community groups. In fact, the effect of happiness on age has been shrinking. So back in the 80s, elderly individuals were more happy than they are now. And I think because even in older individuals, we're seeing more loneliness, we're seeing a move away from some of the things that really make us happy. So, but it is a good thing to look forward to. Now, typically, you're going to get happier as you get older, so that's good. In terms of what to do for really depressed individuals, it depends on like how depressed we're talking about. And the analogy I use with my students, I often use this sort of health analogy, like exercise and things, because it's very related to happiness. You have to put the work in, right? You know, if you had heart disease or high blood pressure and you came to the doctor and asked, doctor, what I should do, your doctor might tell you, do some exercise. You know, go on the treadmill and get some cardio. But if you walked into the doctor's office and you're like, I'm having a heart attack right now, I'm in acute cardiac arrest, your doctor wouldn't say, get on the treadmill right now, right? You need a different form of care when you're that extreme. And I think the same thing is true for depression. You know, if you come to me and you say, I'm a little depressed, I'm kind of down, you know, I'm not flourishing as much as I think all those tips I just gave you would really improve things. But if you came to me and you said, I'm acutely suicidal right now, you might need a different level of care, right? Just like the difference between having high blood pressure and having a heart attack at that moment. And so what the research shows is that these practices do work for depressed individuals. But again, you know, we need to calibrate where we are. You know, if you're in acute psychological distress, you need acute care. I don't want you like writing a gratitude letter. I want you like seeing a therapist, maybe getting medication, getting to the point that you're stable. And then I think those practices really can help.
Yes, dear Laurie, I'm wondering how to be happy with being ordinary.
Yeah, I think this is something that comes up a lot in this day and age because, you know, we used to be a culture that was happy with being ordinary. But now we're so self-focused, we don't get to be ordinary. We all have to be Yale students, we all have to be the top of our class, and we all have to be the best athlete, and we all have to be the prettiest on Instagram and have the best vacations. Like, the culture kind of moves us in this weird direction. But if you follow what these practices suggest, like if you get back to the basics, and if you can just be with your breath and like feel what that feels like, you can kind of get out of this cycle of feeling like you have to be the best of the best of the best. Like, you can get pleasure from the things that are just ordinary. You know, enjoying breathing, enjoying being apart, having a nice conversation with someone. None of that requires, you know, getting into Yale or being 100%. And so I think following these kinds of practices can get you out of that mode of feeling like you have to be perfect, special. First of all, it ends up not being about you, and it ends up being about things that are so much more basic than that.
This question says that I feel like I'm more pessimistic. Because you tell us to find something to be grateful, to show gratitude, but I really cannot find something to thank for.
Yeah.
So
I think when we think gratitude, we have to think the big things. I got into Yale or something like that. Like many of you, when I put up that picture of the wheelchair, if you're lucky enough to be walking in this room, which many of you are, not everyone is, like that's a moment to be grateful. Like you could not be here right now because you could be in the hospital because you could have gotten hit by a car walking into this place, but you didn't, right? You could, and it sounds weird, but you can kind of have these. So this technique of kind of negative visualization where you very quickly kind of think about a counterfactual that's worse can sometimes be useful for gratitude. Because it's like, a lot of things might be going bad right now, but at least you're going to walk out of here, right? At least you have that, right? And this is why gratitude can be so powerful, especially in stressful times. My students would often, we put the gratitude section where they're doing the gratitude requirement around midterms. And I found that students really resonated with it. They would say things like, normally midterms are so stressful and I'm like so wrapped up in like, am I gonna get a good grade and stuff? But then when I did the gratitude practice, the students would think, okay, I have my mom, I have my dad, I have my family, I have my health. Like ultimately, if I don't get the perfect grade, it doesn't, like the things that really matter are in place. And it can kind of give you that perspective. So I think if you're having trouble with gratitude, don't try to start with the big things. Start with the basics. Many of us have our eyesight. Like think with your physical properties. You're breathing right now. You're not in the hospital. Like these are things that not everybody has.
People live in herds, so no man is an island. So there's a lot of unhappiness comes from peer pressure and being compared to other people. So how do we strike a balance between finding our independent self and caring about how other people think about us?
But a couple of things here, I think, if you're listening to the message of the class. One is that when we socially compare, it's often about the things that don't matter for happiness. It's often like, other people are prettier than me, or they have more money, or it's not like other people are more grateful than me. And so I think if you could try to retrain your mindset about what really matters, it's just harder to compare on those things. The second thing is I think this is another spot where the research shows gratitude can be really powerful. If I'm comparing like, oh, my vacation wasn't really as interesting as this other person's vacation, if I'm not thinking about that, but if I'm thinking about no, I'm just grateful to be able to use my legs and walk out of here. That's not a given, and that's a gift. That can kind of retrain your mindset to pay attention to the stuff that really matters. That means you're socially comparing yourself against people who have circumstances that are bad. And that it's not necessarily that it makes you feel good, but it makes you appreciate the kinds of things that you have.
A lot of times, when I listen to a lecture, I'm touched and moved. But 2 days later, everything goes back to normal. So how do I want to make real changes. How do I really go about it?
So I think the good news is that the science also gives us tips about how to make real changes. One is to harness something that's going to let you stick with it. And so I think listening to the podcast, if you listen in English, or trying to do the class, if you speak English, is a good way to do it. Another is to harness some social support. And this is where families, especially kids, can be really helpful. I think if your children are here, they've heard this, they're going to hold you accountable. But even if they haven't, talk with them about this over dinner. Tell your kids, Dad wants to be grateful today. Remind Dad to be grateful, and they will be very happy to do that, especially with phones. I do this with my husband where I say, I want to be more present, I want to not use the phone. Remind me when he gets very excited about reminding me, your phone is down again, you're not being very grateful. No, but the research just shows that having that social support where you're kind of in it together is useful for making habits stick, but it's also a way of forming social connections and kind of reinforcing these ideas. So bring in the community, really share these ideas more broadly. But the honest answer is it takes work. That's just the bad news about happiness. You can do it, but it's just like, learning to play the violin or getting really fit so you can run a marathon. You just have to find ways to force yourself to do it every day. Good news is if you can do that, things will improve.